Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Book Fest. My name is Jennifer Ann Gordon. I am the author of Pretty Ugly, From Daylight to Madness, and The Japanese Box and Other Stories. Joining me today is one of my very favorite people on this planet and one of my very favorite writers. Working today is Sean Cosby, S.A. Cosby, to people who just buy his books everywhere. Sean, welcome to the Book Fest.
Oh, man, thank you for having me. It's so good to see you again.
It is so good to see you. I will say, for our viewers, the last time I saw Sean, we were drinking absinthe, and it was very late at night at a writer's conference.
As it should be.
As it should be. So, Sean, thank you again for being here. For people who are tuning in who don't know you and don't know your work, why don't you start by telling our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Sean, S.A. Cosby. I'm a writer from Southeastern Virginia. My first published novel was actually a fantasy novel called Brotherhood of the Blade. And then I switched over to writing crime fiction, rural Southern crime fiction. And my first book in that genre was called My Darkest Prayer. And from My Darkest Prayer, I wrote Blacktop Wasteland, which begat Razorblade Tears, which begat All the Sinners Bleed, which is soon to begat King of Ashes, which is my next book. Most of my books takes place in the South, in rural Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. I like to say that if you ever saw the TV show Justified or Ozarks, it's a lot like that, except it's a lot of Black people that lead it. And so a little twist there, I guess. But not so much if you lived in the South that I lived in. But yeah, I get to write crime novels about very bad people doing very bad things for what they think are good reasons.
I love that. So you just said something that I didn't know about you, that your first novel was a fantasy novel. Like, we've known each other now for years, and this is the first I'm like putting that in my head. So I guess, how did you go from fantasy to crime?
So this is my origin story as a crime writer. Like Batman has an origin story, Superman, everybody has an origin story. So I always wanted to write fantasy, horror, sci-fi. I grew up reading Stephen King, Clive Barker, Richard Matheson, Robert Bloch, Shirley Jackson, Kathy Koja, all these incredible horror writers. And so I was like, oh, I want to write horror novels. And nobody ever wanted to publish my horror or fantasy novels. I ended up self-publishing Brotherhood of the Blade, which is an urban sort of fantasy martial arts epic that I created. And what ended up happening was I had a friend who was a performer. She's a belly dancer, and she went to New York City. And after her performance, she happened to walk into this bar in New York called Shade. And the manager of this bar is a guy named Todd Robinson. And Todd Robinson used to publish a magazine called Thug Lit, which was a hard-boiled, hardcore crime short fiction magazine. And when she came back from New York, she said, hey, I met this guy and he's paying for crime stories. And I was like, how much is he paying? And she was like, I think it's like 50 or $100. And I really needed that money. And so I sat down and wrote a book.
I'm still in that position where somebody's like, this story, I'll give you $50 for. I'm like, sold. Like, I will do it.
Exactly. And so I have been somebody who's always been a fan of crime and mystery fiction as well as horror and sci-fi. I read everything as a kid. And so, but I did identify with crime fiction. I loved, my uncle used to give me his old detective novels. So I'd read like Raymond Chandler and Ross McDonald and Chester Himes and folks like that. And so I never thought that anyone would be interested in crime stories set where I lived in the South. And so I just wrote fantasy and horror. But in retrospect, all my horror and all my fantasy still had a strong element of crime, of noir. And so anyway, I wrote this story, sent it in, it got published. And that was sort of, everything clicked for me at that moment. I was like, oh, maybe these are the kind of stories that I should be telling. And so I kind of moved over from horror to sci-fi and fantasy into crime fiction. Although I have a good friend of mine who says that horror and crime fiction are kissing cousins. They go to the same church They just sit in different pews.
I love that. And I totally agree as somebody who is a horror writer. But I always say I'm a horror writer, but I dabble in crime fiction. And like the one crime novel I have that's out on sub right now, like people are like, but isn't that horror? I'm like, I mean, so I agree. They are kissing cousins. So, and I feel like I should have said this at the beginning too. I should be congratulating you because very recently you just won your 5th Anthony Award. Is it 5 that you've won so far, Sean?
It is.
It's okay to
5,
brag.
and I'm
It's
so
okay to brag.
I'm so grateful, but I'm just not a person that I have very strong imposter syndrome. And so I'm not the person that's going to like wear a t-shirt that says 5 times Anthony Award winner. In fact, somebody had to point it out to me because I wouldn't say it after I won the award. I think it's because I am just so extraordinarily grateful to be able to do this for a living. And I feel so lucky to be able to do this. And so I don't see myself on any type of pedestal. But I mean, when fans and readers and colleagues want to celebrate you, I've learned to take the compliment, which has been difficult in the past.
I mean, you've had really quite a journey because I mean, the very first time I ever talked to you, like Blacktop Wasteland was just taking off. And I just like see how much has changed for you in the past 3.5, 4 years. When Stephen King like tweeted about Blacktop Wasteland, did you ever think to yourself, I'm going to be on The Tonight Show? I'm going to be on The Daily Show. Barack Obama is going to list my books on his like summer reading list.
I mean, the quick answer is no. I never expected any of that. Like everything that has happened to me that has been positive in my writing career is a goal I never dared to dream to have. Like being on The Tonight Show is not something I ever just dreamed about. I mean, I wanted it. Everybody wants it'd be nice to be on the show, but I mean, like being a New York Times bestseller was one of those things that you dare not speak it because you don't want to jinx it. But it's in the back of your mind. But then when it happens, it's so overwhelming. It's so incredibly humbling for me. You would think it'd be the opposite. You would think these things would happen and you would start thinking, well, I'm hot stuff now. And I'm the exact opposite. When these things happen, I feel like, wow, I do not deserve this. I'm so grateful that this happened.
But you do deserve it. You do deserve it because you're humble. You're one of the nicest people I know. You are a champion of other authors. You love the written word so much. It's like it should be happening to you. But I remember while we were drinking absinthe not too long ago, you said something that I just loved so much. And it really sums up you as a person. You said, you are only as good as your next book. So how much pressure do you feel when you're writing your next book? Like, how does that feel for you? Like, is it the weight of the world on your shoulders? Do you have freedom? Like, tell us about the neuroses, Sean. Tell us about the panic attacks.
Oh my God, that's such a good question. I just had this conversation with somebody the other day. And somebody asked me, they're like, oh, well, you probably don't get nervous about your books anymore. I get nervous about every book. I feel like, is this the book where people are going to realize I don't really know what I'm doing? I'm literally making all this up. And well,
that's what writing is, Sean. It is making it up.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like I will say nobody puts that pressure on me. Like my publisher is great, my editor is wonderful, my agent is one of the best people I know. Nobody puts that pressure on me except me, because I feel like deep down inside, I just have a very blue collar way of looking at it. Like if somebody buys one of my books and they pay $27.50 or whatever it happens to be, or the paperback is $14, or even if they get it through their Kindle and it's like $3.99, I still feel like that's somebody's hard-earned money. And so I want them to be entertained. I want them to enjoy it. I want them to like the story. I think all writers are creative people and I think you understand this as a writer and as a dancer, as a performer. Deep down inside, you want to be liked. You want people to like this thing that you're making, that you're creating, that you're mining out of your soul. And I think it's similar when you write a book as it is when you are performing an original piece of choreography. You want someone, I did this thing. I bled and I cried and I pulled this thing into kicking and screaming into the world. And I want you to like it, not just because I worked hard on it, but because I think it's good. And I think that's something that always dwells in you as a creative person. And so for me, I literally turned in the rough draft of a new book recently. And I sat there for 2 days because my editor hadn't called me. And I was like, well, she hates it. It's terrible. It's the worst thing ever written. And
it is such panic. I feel like every time I send my agent something, and if I don't get a response immediately, which of course I don't, she has other clients, she's doing stuff. I'm like, she hates it. She's dropping me. It's the worst thing. It's not even a book. It doesn't make sense. Like I go through like the whole, like every emotion possible.
Yeah. I think the people who are really, in love with creativity, in love with the process, in love with the art, I think that never leaves you. I think, I once heard a writer say this, a very successful writer. He said, if you're mailing it in or you're phoning it in, then stop, because this isn't for you anymore. And I really believe that. I think, the process, the creation is the thing. The product is the end result. And you want that product to be good and entertaining and fun and maybe say something to people, but also the process, the creation of it is the thing. It's when the writing is really going well, when the words are flowing, it's the best feeling in the world. I get an endorphin rush when the story is going well, or when I let somebody.
It's way better than working out.
I mean, I like working. I like lifting weights too, but there are different tiers to that. But no, I think for me, I will always pressure myself because I think I'm my hardest critic. I'm my harshest critic. I don't ever want to put something out with my name on it that I don't feel like I gave 110%. And so I don't think that ever leaves you.
And do you ever think about, so, you're kind of known right now as, Southern Noir. You write beautiful violence. If that's, I for people who aren't familiar with your work, like violence is a huge part of it in every kind of violence, emotional, physical. Is there a need to top yourself? Is there a need to reinvent yourself so you're not just like, oh, Sean Cosby, I wonder if there's going to be another wood chipper scene?
Okay,
which I'm a huge fan of wood chipper scenes.
The wood chipper scene is infamous. But it's so funny to me that when people come to me about the wood chipper scene in Razorblade Tears, they are like, oh, I can't believe I got through that scene. In that book, I never show you what happens. I just introduce it's Chekhov's wood chipper. I just introduce it. And then we are under the assumption that it was used later. But to your point, to your question, I don't feel a need to top myself, but I do feel a need to reinvent myself. I do feel like, for me, violence in writing is always a confession of pain. Violence is the confession of how hurt you are. Violence is sort of an articulation of internal pain, internal strife, internal trauma. And so, I mean, I think if you're writing crime novels, you can have fist fights. Fist fights are going to exist. Physical altercations are going to exist. But I think when it comes time to deal out real violence, when people are going to get really hurt, I think you have to approach it seriously. You have to approach it with a sober mind, but also no two people are going to commit the same act of violence the same way, right? It's almost like when you do when you watch a forensic TV show or true detective show or something like that, where they can tell, this person stabbed this way and this person stabbed that way. And so for me, when I'm writing a violent scene, one, I want it to mean something. I want it to have emotional narrative weight. So it's not just violence for violence sake, but two, it is almost a way to articulate, to sort of express something about the character, both the person committing the violence and the victim of it. And so for me, that's always going to be important. I think true violence is brutal. I think real violence hurts. And so I aim for the realistic, for the true, but the never cartoony. I never wanted to be cartoony violence. I mean, it can be humorous and it can be funny, but it's always serious. I mean, blood is blood. And so I think that's important for me. But I don't think about topping myself. I just think about making sure that the violence expresses who this character is in an original way.
Yeah, I love what you said about how it's just like it's like the way to express pain. I love that. And I feel like with your writing especially, your characters are so well crafted that even if they are not likable, which many of them are not technically likable characters, they're very lovable. Like I understand them. I know them. Where do you start with building a character? Do you like, at what point does it, like the Big Bang Theory, like do you figure out like the heart of their pain, a core memory, and go from there? What's it like for you?
That's a great question. So for me, it's always about, what does this character want? What is it they desire? What is it they need? What is it they have to have? Like if you look at that, like with Blacktop Wasteland, what does Bug want? More than anything, Bug wants stability. He wants a steady job. He wants a stable home life. He wants a stable family life. How you go about doing that is where the conflict happens. Because for all the stability he wants, he goes about it in an incredibly chaotic way. Like Ike and Buddy Lee in Razorblade Tears, what is it they want? Ultimately, they want revenge. They want revenge for the murder of their sons. But again, the conflict comes from the idea that the revenge won't bring their boys back. It won't bring them back to life.
Right.
And
it won't negate the fact that they weren't the best dads in the world. Like,
exactly.
They can't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the revenge is both the desire and the need, but also it's the sort of hubris. It's the sort of conflict that exists. And so for me, that's always the thing. What does this character want? And then I try to think about how far are they willing to go to get what they want? And I think that's a very telling idea about a character, male or female, regardless of your ethnicity, your background. How far are you willing to go? What are you prepared to do to achieve your goal? So, for instance, with All the Sinners Bleed, my main character is a sheriff, a small town sheriff. And what does he want? He wants order. He wants the opposite of chaos. How far are you willing to go? And so for me, I'm always fascinated with that question. And I'm always surprised at how far my characters are willing to go or where they'll draw the line. Sometimes there's a character that I think, well, they're willing to do almost anything, and they'll surprise me. Like, no, this is where I have to stop. I can't go any further. And then sometimes it's the opposite. A character that I thought, well, they won't go this far. They're willing to go that far and even further. And so for me, that's the basis. That's the foundation for me building a character.
Oh, I love that so much. So your characters still surprise you as you're writing them. I adore that. I always tell this story of, I was writing my first novel. I'm writing Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, and I'm typing away, and it's my main character, and he makes a terrible choice that I didn't know he was going to make, and he made it. And I remember writing it, and I screamed. I was like, no! Like this loud, dramatic dog comes rushing in. Roman, my husband, comes rushing in. He's like, are you okay? What's going on? And I said, like my main character just did blah, blah, blah. And he was like, so? And I'm like, it changes everything. And he's like, well, you can just delete it. And I'm like, I can't delete it. He made that choice. And now I have to deal with it as a writer.
Oh, yeah, no. And that happens a lot to me. Oh. Like, that happens a lot. Like, I was going to say, to your point, that happens a lot. Like, characters decide, I'm going to make this decision, or I'm not going to do this thing, or I'm going to say this thing, or reveal this piece of information, or and I love that. I love when characters take initiative and you've created this person who has a set sense of autonomy in a way.
Yeah, exactly. So how much of your writing process is pre-planned? Like, I don't think I've ever asked you if you were a pantser. Do you outline, Sean? What else don't I know about you? You wrote a fantasy novel and now this?
I am, I like to say that I am a hybrid. I'm not a pantser, but I'm not a plotter. I don't outline, but I write a pretty extensive synopsis before I start a book. It's sort of me telling myself the story of the book. And so that can be anywhere from 2 to 3, I think sometimes 5 pages at the most. That's usually handwritten. That's just me. This will be interesting. And what do I want to happen in this book? And how do I want this story to unfold? And that's sort of a roadmap. But when I actually sit down to start writing the novel, that I don't always follow the synopsis 100%. Sometimes I'll take a tangent here, take a tangent there. But that synopsis is, like I said, a roadmap. It kind of gives me an idea of where I kind of want the story to go. And then as I'm writing, I sort of let the natural flow and rhythm of the story dictate, how far or how close we're following the synopsis, or if we're following it at all. I do have a superstition when it comes to writing, though. I don't start a novel until I come up with a title.
I love that. So I don't start a novel until I see in my brain the very last line. Like I need that last visual moment. And then I usually have no idea how I'm going to get there. But once I see that moment, I'm like, whoa, that's it. That's the ending. Okay. I have, 90,000 words to get there.
That's interesting. I like that because I'm of the mindset that last lines are very important. Last paragraphs are very important. And so I have something similar. Like I can't start the book until I get a title, but like you, I have to visualize the last scene, the last line. I have to see where those characters are, how many survive to the end, and what does that look like?
Right.
So I thought that's interesting.
So have you ever gotten a pushback on any of your titles? Has anybody tried to change them? Now that it's like so important to your process.
Yeah. I mean, kind of like one time. So the original title of All the Sinners Bleed was Black as Sackcloth, which is a line from a biblical verse in Revelation. And the moon became black as sackcloth. I think it's Revelations 23. But anyway, that was the original title. And my editor rightly pointed out, I'd already had a title called Blacktop Wasteland. And she was like, maybe you want to vary it up. Now, here's the funny thing. I had started that book when she made that suggestion. I had to stop. I couldn't write another word until I got a new title. I just couldn't. I would look at the screen and it just wasn't working. And I just I got to come up with a new title. So for like 2 months, I just sat on that book and I was like, I got to come up with a new title. And finally, what happened is I had a conversation with a friend of mine. Long story, but I'll make it short. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a minister, and we were talking because there's a lot of religious themes and all the sinners. And he was like, we're all sinners. We all bleed the same. And I was like, oh, that's it. But I couldn't write a word until I came up with a new title. And I remember talking to my agent about it, and he was like, well, can't you just put like holding title or something? I can't. It just. And I think I've trained myself to do that. I don't think that's actually something that I should be doing, but I think it's right.
No, I feel like if you mentioned that to a therapist, they would be like, Sean, you don't need to do that, Sean. You're going to be fine.
Yes.
But no, I get
it's
it.
Not a healthy,
I get it. It's not healthy.
Not a
this is not good for you. Oh my gosh. I hate to say it. I love that. I mean, I don't love the 2 months of like agony you had of like, I can't move on from this. Did you ever
That's
start
exactly what it
panicking?
was.
Like, what
Yeah.
if I never get a title?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, I did, for real. Because I like I said, I had written about oh 20,000 words. So I knew the story was there and it was a good story and I was enjoying the process of writing it. And I said, if I don't get another title, I'm gonna have to scrap this and start something else. And I meant that. That was serious. Like I was like, I cannot, because to me, and this makes me sound really crazy. Um, but for me, the title is sort of the it creates the atmosphere. It creates the world that the story is going to be in. And so when I say the title, All the Sinners Bleed, that encompasses so much. It encompasses humanity, the frailty of humanity, sort of from a religious aspect, the idea that we're all sinners, that we all fall short of grace, all these sort of things that I can't articulate normally. I can just use the title as shorthand for that. And so, yeah, I panicked. I did. I was so glad I came up with something. It was such a relief.
I can write again.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I mean, I honestly love author superstitions because, I mean, I talk to a lot of authors and we all have our quirks. Um, so I just love that. What is your favorite part of the writing process? Like, so I always tell people I love the second draft of a book because I feel like a lot of the heavy lifting's been done. It's just polishing, making it better, intermingled with a lot of like, I wrote this. This is terrible. And I wrote this. I'm going to win the Pulitzer Prize or whatever, like cockamamie thing you think in your head. So what is your favorite part of the whole process?
Yeah. I think honestly, I'm the opposite. I think for me, the first draft is my favorite because it's the rawest, most unfettered connection to the muse, creativity, my internal monologue, whatever you want to call it. That's the first time like you raise your hand and the lightning bolt hits you, and it's like, oh, this is the story. I'm a big believer in string theory. And so in alternative dimensions, and I believe every story that's ever been told really happened somewhere else in another dimension, in an alternate timeline. And so for me, it's really cool that I feel like I've tapped into the story of these people and I'm reporting it. I'm sharing it. It's a sort of way of telepathy. Second draft is good because, like you said, I'm polishing it. The stuff that I wrote that is really good, I can make it look better. The stuff that I wrote that's not so good, I can fix it. But for me, my favorite part is when it's really just I'm being fed these ideas from somewhere. I don't know where. And when I get to the end, I always like the last 20 pages because that's when the confrontations come into a head. That's when the characters are at the end of their journey. I'm excited to see how everything plays out. Because a lot of times, even though I've written a synopsis, I don't know exactly how it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I change it at the very last minute. It's like, oh, this character's going to do that. Let's do this. Because I feel like it gives an extra dimension to the story. So, but yeah, the first draft is probably my favorite part.
I feel like the first draft, I mean, I do love it, but it's such a roller coaster because for me, the first draft is like, it's ephemeral. Like at any moment in time, I feel like it can just like fall out of my hands and then it's gone forever. And I'm like, because, I'm similar to you. I don't write a synopsis, but I don't outline, but I'm definitely not a pantser. I kind of know what's happening. But again, because I haven't committed anything, I'm just like, it could go away. What if, because I mean, I've been there where you're like 30,000, 40,000 words into a book. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, gone. Like, what is this that I'm writing? Has that happened to you? Have you had to throw away 30,000 words before?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I started a book a few years ago and it was going to be sort of a period piece set in the 30s, like right at the height of Prohibition, or late 20s, early 30s. And I did not have the skills necessary at the time to write that book. I'm going to come back to that book. But I was just like, I got like 25,000 words into it. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where this story is going. But a friend of mine, Jordan Harper, who's a great writer, he gave me this piece of advice. He said, don't delete everything. Put it in a file. Just step away from it. Just leave it there. And maybe you can figure out how to fix it later. And I did that. That was like 7 years ago. And I finally feel like now I have the skill set to tackle it. But it's a humbling feeling when you realize this story is beyond my grasp right now. This is beyond my reach.
Yeah.
I don't have the fastball necessary, the curveball necessary to tell the story. And as a writer, as a creative person, it's like I said, it's humbling, but it's not sad. It used to make me really sad. I don't get sad anymore because I feel like, okay, I'll come back to it. I'll figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And I feel like in my brain, I've always wanted to write like a cozy mystery, which I know sounds like silly coming from me, but I know for a fact I don't have the skill set. Like I don't have the tools to write a cozy mystery. I know for a fact it would be like, 20,000 words in and I would do something really dark and really screwed up. And people would be like, this isn't cozy at all. Like, what is wrong with this? But in my brain, so I have like a little blurb about this cozy mystery I want to write someday. But every time I kind of like try to tackle it, it always ends with like somebody's hand going in like a garbage disposal. And I'm like, nope, you're doing it wrong. So do you have, besides this 1930s, 20s project?
Yeah, I have stuff like that. Like, it was funny. You were talking about trying to write a cozy. That made me think I have this coming of age story that I wrote, right? About a kid whose father is a lion tamer in a small circus, right? In like the 80s or 90s. And it was supposed to be this coming of age short story about his first intimate encounter. He's like 17, going on 18. And I wrote it and I was like, this is going to be like a coming of age thing. This is my Raymond Carver moment, right? And then when I finished it, I was like, oh, yeah, I had to get beat up he like cheated on he's cheating with this woman that was married to like another circus performer, and that circus performer like tried to cut his finger off. And then there's two lions that eat somebody. And it was like, oh, well, sometimes you gotta dance with who brought you to the party. So
Oh my gosh. So getting back to like your journey over the past several years, what has been the moment that is most awe-inspiring? I know you've met a lot of your idols, you've traveled all over the world, you've been obviously on lots of TV shows. Has there been a moment that made you really think that this couldn't possibly be reality, that maybe somehow you slipped into one of your other dimensions?
I'll tell you two instances. One is super like, name droppy celebrity moment. And the other one is very intimate, but it meant a lot to me. Still does. So I'll tell you the name droppy moment first. So early this year, I got to go to France, and I was in Lyon, France, for this festival called Croix de Perloir. It's a big, giant crime writing festival. And you have all these famous crime writers. I happen to be able to travel with my friend Gabino Iglesias, my buddy, my homeboy, great writer. His new book is out right now. Gabino's really cool. So we had a chance to share this adventure together. Two American kids, doing the best they can. So to paraphrase John Mellencamp. And so anyway, we're in Lyon, and we meet John Grisham. He's at the festival as well. And we're on a panel with John Grisham. And then after the panel, John Grisham comes up to us and is like, hey, you guys want to get a drink? Yeah. And so uh, we go to this fancy hotel where John Grisham is staying at, and he shares that information with us. And we're sitting in this fancy hotel bar, and we're drinking some really, really expensive scotch. And, it's just that moment. It's a moment where I'm like, wow, I'm in Paris. I'm in France. I'm in Lyon with John Grisham. I'm having drinks with John Grisham. And that, coming from where I come from, I grew up very poor. I was raised by a single mother in a single wide trailer, in a small rural county in Virginia. I remember having to wear my brother's shoes to school, and, not having a good winter coat and things like that. And now I'm in Lyon, Paris, drinking 30-year Glenfiddich with John Grisham. That was a moment that really struck me as how far that we've come as writers, as individuals, my own personal journey. The other moment that really I'll never forget, that made me realize how much my books have touched people and how much it means to people. I was in LA at the Los Angeles Town Book Festival, and a lady comes up to me and she's like, I've read Razorblade Tears 3 times. I'm like, oh, wow, thank you. And she said, would you sign this book for me? I'm like, yeah. She said, can you sign it? It was a man's name. I'm like, of course. So I'm signing it. And she proceeds to tell me that her son was gay, and that her and her son did not get along, and that she didn't accept who he was. And unfortunately, one night they got in a really bad argument. He jumped in his vehicle, drove off down the road, had an accident, and passed away. And she says, I've read your book 3 times because when I read your book, I feel like I'm talking to him. That's why I have you sign the book to him. And I remember I was sitting next to Stephen Graham Jones on one side and Megan Abbott on the other side. And all 3 of us started crying.
I'm crying now.
The lady was crying. Yeah. And so she asked me, could she hug me? And she gave me a big hug, and she went to walk away. And then the guy behind her, and this was such a great sort of end to the story, he puts the book on the table. He says, I just really like the book, man. I don't really have a deep story. I'm so sorry. And I'm like, no, that's great. And for me, that moment will always stick in my head, because it's the extreme of what you want as a writer. On the one hand, you have someone who, for that person, this book is a touchstone moment. This book is going to mean something to them the rest of their life because of what they've gone through and how this book represents that. But on the other end, you have someone who just picked it up and sat down and just loved the story, and just it resonated with them because it was a good tale. And I think as a writer, you want both of those things, and rarely do you see both of those things represented in front of you at the same time, or roughly the same time. And so for me, that's a moment that will always live in my heart, because that's all I ever want to do, is tell stories and reach people. And that moment just made me realize that's what's happening, that people, you write a story and it's not yours anymore. When you put it out in the world, it belongs to the person that's, ingesting it. So whether it's something to bide your time on your train ride home, or whether it's something that speaks to you in a profoundly deep way, both of those are valid responses, and both of those mean the world to a writer, to me. So.
That was so beautiful. Like all of it. The John Grisham story, of course, the story about the woman losing her son. But I just have to say, your John Grisham story, that's how I felt when you and I were sipping drinks together this summer. I was like, I am having drinks with Sean Cosby. I did. I felt like that. I remember I texted my husband and I'm like, I'm having drinks with Sean Cosby. And yeah, because you are, again, such a good person, arguably one of the most gifted writers I have read, that I know, that's working today. So yeah, you are the John Grisham to so many people. And so
oh my God,
as a fan, as a friend, thank you, Sean, for also being, the type of writer with the type of story that I look up to, because, you and I have bonded in the past, growing up real poor, not having anything and being able to tell stories that not only transport us, but transport readers and fans. And you're living the dream. You're an inspiration for everybody. And I adore you, and I adore talking to you.
Well, I gotta say, I love your work. I love the heart and soul that you put into your work, into your books, into everything you do, and getting to hang out at Camp Nikon with you earlier this year was such a highlight. It was such a great moment, to
It was
be
great.
in the presence of somebody who's been a friend of yours for so long. And yes, we got to drink absinthe. I felt like it was the
Yeah.
the Paul Rudd gift. Like, look at us. Who would have thought it? Not me. So
Yeah. Exactly. And I will say your next book, I'm looking forward to that so much. Not just because one of your main characters is named Roman, and that's my husband's name, but you have to know that my husband every day, if you post anything about your book, he's like, "Oh, that's the book that's about me." I'm like, it's not about you, right? Like, but it will forever in our house be the book about my husband.
Well, you know what's funny? I picked the name of that character totally independent from knowing Roman. Like, I just was like, I want a strong name for this character, and there's a whole thing. The name Roman, it's the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire fell, and there's this character has a fall from grace. And so I was like, oh, that'll be cool. And then I posted something, and your husband was like, oh, what am I doing today? And I'm like, oh, that's right.
No, I love it. I cannot wait for it to come out. And for everybody who's watching this, if you haven't read Sean's work, literally you have to just read everything. Read it twice, read it 3 times, cry, love these characters, hate these characters. But you will, you're doing yourself a favor by reading Sean's work. So on that note, Sean, thank you so much for being here with me today, having this conversation. Everybody at the Book Fest, we all thank you, and thank you everyone who is watching this, and buy Sean's books.